One of you's going to tell plop, and the other one's going to listen, as if they've never heard it before. But they might want to join in with you, because they love your storytelling. You're their favourite storytelling teacher. Finally, he came to a mountain, and in the mountain there was a cave, una cueva. And inside the cave, he could see Conejo. Conejo, I'm going to catch you. I'm going to eat you. Oh no, said Conejo. You must be talking about another rabbit, not me. But now you are here, Jaguar, you can help me. You see, I'm building this house and it's going to fall down. I'm holding up the walls, but my paws are weak. Help me, Jaguar. You are so strong. Look at your strong paws. You could hold this up while I could go and fetch a stick to support the walls of my house. Wow. I am strong. The Jaguar padded into the cave and he put his strong patas paws against the walls. And with a hop and a skip, Conejo was out of the cave and into the forest and away. And, well, Jaguar, can you show me your patas? He waited there, and he waited there, and he waited there.
And he waited there, and he waited there, and he waited there.
Such a trick! Rhythm, rhyme, repetition, response, and remembering. Well, the 5 R's.
Waited there. That's repetition and rhythm at the same time.
And what's the effect for you, Jana, of the rhythm of that? They waited there, and they waited there, and they waited there.
I don't know, it brings dynamic into the story. It makes it a lot more, interesting. It makes me want to participate more. And it makes me, be able to actually imagine that I am that bird. I'm that animal.
With rhythm, I mean, when we tell stories, our speech pattern tends to change. We go into slightly heightened speech. But when we go into things like he waited there and he waited there, it becomes even more heightened. It steps up again. Maybe there's a pause, and then that is very rhythmically presented. And then maybe at the end of an episode, you waited there with, I've been tricked. There's a kind of, oh, that's the end of that episode. And now the new episode begins, the new part of the story. So often in stories, we might have refrains or rhymes that occur repeatedly, often 3 times, through the story. And it's great kind of drilling. Jamie was talking about drilling yesterday morning. It's drilling within the story. Students are completely unaware, usually, of the fact that we have any repeated actions?
Yes.
Physical repetition. For example,
They were running and running.
everybody, they ran and they ran. We have this physical repetition that supports the text. Okay. So we can repeat sounds, we can repeat words, we can repeat phrases, we can repeat rhymes, we can repeat lines of a song, we can repeat actions, gesture or mime that might be accompanying phrases or words to support that. And then look at this at the bottom. Can you see at the back? Gesture indicating first time, repeat after teacher. Second time, repeat with teacher. Third time, repeat without teacher. If you go back to Rabbit and Jaguar, the first time I said, they waited there and they waited there. Jaguar, he waited there and he waited there and he waited there. He waited there.
He waited there. He waited there.
Repeat after teacher. The second time, he waited there and he waited there and he waited there.
He waited there. He waited there.
And the third time, repeating without the teacher. So very, very simple. Students responding during the storytelling, while they are being told the story. What's happening? How are they responding? How are you responding when you're listening to the story? A level of engagement. okay, because of all these other factors. Okay, let's talk about these things. So students might be getting involved verbally by joining in with the words, but also they're getting involved non-verbally. So they might be using kind of any kind of vocalization or exclamation or laughter. Very often when I'm telling stories, language learners will call out, "Oh no!" laughter. We can often see their reaction in the way that they're responding, their facial expressions. Call and response. Story, story! Response. And that's often a collective response. Obviously, students are responding individually. We don't know exactly how each student is responding, but we can also sense a collective response. So there's two things happening at the same time. Think about all the stories we've talked about so far and remembering. So as a student listening to the story, what's happening in terms of memory and
Students
remembering?
remember long phrases or sentences. For example, they ran and ran deep into, as fast as they could, they ran deep into the wood. That's a very long phrase for a child.
It is quite a long chunk of language, isn't it? Is it possible for them to remember all of that?
Well, if it's repeated a lot of times.
Is it possible for students who are starting with English to remember long chunks? I think so.
When you connect movement and repetition and do it again and again, then it's easier to remember for the children. They start repeating after you.
They start repeating after you, they start saying with you, and then with that gesture, that little gesture. And here, it's a big room, so I'm using quite a big gesture. But if I'm sitting down with 10 students, the gesture may be just, it's just that lift of the chin, that raise of the eyebrow. And students, they want to join in, but that's the invitation. And the invitation takes a little bit of mental imagery, emotion, language, memory are all very closely connected. Yes, Roka?
Yes, I would like to add that for me, for example, it's easier to remember clock because it has so much rhythm and it has a melody, unlike the Stone, which does have a deeper emotion. And I do remember the emotion, but I don't actually remember how you said it.
You remember the emotion, but
Yes.
but the story is
So
different.
I would describe the story with my own words.
Yeah.
However, I would tell clock more with your words than before.
Absolutely. And am I right to think, Reka, that you're quite a musical and rhythmic person? I would say so, and that's often true. Like me, rhythm and melody are very intrinsic to the way I learn stories and I tell stories. And if people are like, I can't stop myself from being rhythmic. One is direct speech. I usually talk the words of the character. Rather than use reported speech, I become the character. And I think that has a lot of impact for students who are learning the language. I try to vary my voice, sometimes louder, sometimes very, very quiet. But if I'm speaking quietly, I have to remember my consonants. The pitch of my voice, sometimes high up and up to the moon. And the tempo, sometimes slower, sometimes faster. How do you think modulating the voice is useful in storytelling? Yes. Useful for the language learning? Posture, the expression, the mannerism. Maybe the mannerism, I don't know, scratching. The voice, I'm going to eat you, of the character. What's the effect of becoming the character when you're telling a story?
It's easier to imagine.
Easier to imagine, and maybe it's also just more fun as well. Yeah. Okay. Using sensory effects. Sensory effects. We might have things like sound, chimes. I use a lot of sound. But we also might use, I don't know, we might use beautiful movement. I don't know. What could this be? I don't know. It could be a meadow the flowers, or it could be the wind. I work a lot with disabled people, and I use a lot of sensory things, a lot of wind movement and temperature. So if we have a story with bread, I have very hot bread that I've just taken out of the microwave, and they all feel the bread while I'm telling the story. And then that's contrasted. Maybe they have to cross a frozen pond, and I have a bowl full of ice, and they put their hand into the ice while I'm describing the frozen pond. So, but those things actually, I've translated them into my language teaching as well, because they really support language learning. So lots of sensory things, feeling texture. We'll look at that tomorrow, feeling texture. Using gesture and mime. Were there any mimes in the stories? What mimes do you remember? Bouncing up and down on the elastic vine, for example. Especially for repeated actions. Using a simple prop to engage students' interest or to add an element of surprise. Prop comes from the theatre, doesn't it? So an object that we might use. What could this be? Could be a boomerang. What else could it be? Banana. What else could it be? Sword. What else could it be? A knife. What else could it be? A snake. To be honest, for me, most often it's a snake. So, you can use objects as... This is a dried bean from a flame tree, an African tree. And I have 30 of these. So sometimes all the students have one, and we're finding the rhythm together. And this afternoon, if you would like me to tell a story with this in the cave. And practice the beginning and the ending. How do I begin stories? Sometimes it's with a sound. Sometimes it's with a song. Sometimes it's just with silence. We create a space. We'll talk more about that later. Create a space for the story, changing the setting. Or maybe just that very magical phrase. The beginning and the ending of the story are fixed, but what happens in between should be much more fluid and flexible and responding to the students who are in front of us. How much English they know, yes, but also the emotions, the stage of the course, why I'm telling this story. All of those things will be affected by that moment. But the beginning and the ending should be fixed, so we can definitely know where we're starting and the students definitely know where it's ending. So when I'm telling a story from Arabic, I always start, Kanya makan fikadim zaman. Kanya makan fikadim zaman. Once there was and there was not, this story. And then, if I'm telling a Japanese story, mukashi mukash. Or if I'm telling a French story, il était une fois, or I'm telling Italian, c'è una volta, había una vez, once upon a time, bilo jednom. These phrases are really, really important, aren't they? They're very magical. As soon as we hear that phrase, you laughed. Oh, I love that phrase. It has so much meaning. And the same at the end. Finishing of it, they lived happily ever after in the traditional fairy tales. And my favourite is Spanish, where they say, eran felices y comieron perdices. They were happy and they ate partridges. I mean, isn't that wonderful? Because of the rhyme. Just so nonsensical. But my favourite ending of all comes from Albanian. And one of the traditional endings in Albania is 3 apples fell from the tree. The first apple was for the one who told the story. The second apple was for the one who listened. And the third apple, the sweetest apple, for the one who takes the story and tells it to others. When you take these stories and tell them to others, taste the sweetness of the story. Rinvolucri. Fairy stories are often familiar in outline, the language is simple, yet the meanings are evocative and many-layered. Many-layered. We'll talk more about that in the workshop. A final image. The sweetest apple is for the one who takes the story and tells it to others. Thank you very much. See you in the workshop.